Me fait plaisir d'accueillir pour modérer cette session sur l'optimisation des systèmes énergétiques et l'AI, nul autre que Kathleen Vaillancourt. So I'm delighted to invite Kathleen to the stage, a seasoned entrepreneur and expert in energy economy environment system modeling. Kathleen brings over 20 years of experience to the field. As president and founder of ESMIA, she's the driving force behind the North American Times Energy Model, NATEM, a tool for decision makers across the continent. As a globally recognized authority in energy system optimization, she represents Canada at the ETSAP Technology Collaboration Program of the International Energy Agency and serve on the board of the Energy Modeling Hub as well. So please join me in welcoming Kathleen and her panelists to the stage.
In my case, it's okay if it's full. Okay, thank you very much. Par là, le vert, okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Last session before the happy hour, so please keep up for another half an hour and a half. So I'm Kathleen from ESMIA. I'm a hybrid chair and speaker this afternoon. So just a brief word about ESMIA, so who we are. A modeling and consulting firm based in Montreal, and we have antennas also in Vancouver and Grenoble, France. We do a large range of modeling activity, from developing model from scratch for organization worldwide, open source or proprietary, to training and to energy transition study using our proprietary models as well. And in terms of, we have different models at ESMIA. One of them is our economy-wide energy system optimization model for North America called NATEM that you've heard about today. So I had this idea to propose to Edouard a session on optimization to discover other groups than the classical one that we know, like CICIT and GERAD and ESMIA, to talk to us about like different optimization problems or models or application. And then Edouard said, yeah, that's a very good idea. Let's combine this with AI. I was not sure because I feel that we hear sometimes too much and about AI for two different kind of things, but it's true that we also start integrating AI technique in our modeling processes. So finally, we could come up with this very interesting panel that I will introduce you in 1 second. But before that, we thought as a panel that it would be good to introduce some basic notion about optimization. I'm sure it will be very elementary for some of you, but not for all. I'm sure of that by the way we hear the word optimal and optimization about all kinds of things that are not always optimization according to my definition. So what is optimization is basically a mathematical formulation of a decision-making problem. For example, what is the best action, and the best is defined according to a certain criteria to achieve a certain target for a given system. So there's different types of optimization models. Classical categories that you will hear about is the linear programming or the non-linear programming approach, for instance. So there's a lot of value in all of them. If we take the linear programming approach, for example, it's kind of the simple, in terms of optimization, a simple approach, but that can be used to study very large and complex problems, which is common when we talk about energy topics. What we mean by large, we can talk about like thousands of technologies, hundreds of commodities, millions of equations, and you can have a model like that solved in 2-3 hours using a linear programming approach, for instance. So it's very powerful tools, and why you would want to use that approach for representing energy system. These types of model allow you to integrate, to represent an energy system in very much detail, technico-economic detail, but also like real-world aspect of energy system to give you the best decision, again, according to some criteria. But most importantly, I think that these models capture the competition and all of these trade-off aspects between technology, between commodity, in terms of cost-benefit analysis. So it's very important. This is something a key feature that you will not find in a simulation model, for instance. So all of this competition, and including from primary resources, for example. And so it's a very powerful tool that can inform policy, of course, and investment decision in the energy system. And some advanced version of optimization model, like stochastic programming of robust optimization, can also be very useful to study uncertainty in the system. So the optimization problem or model in a simple way will integrate three main components. You will have the objective function, so what you're trying to achieve, which will be a criteria to minimize or to maximize. You will have decision variable, so what are the unknown of the problem that you want to learn about using your model, and the constraints. So let's look at just few examples of that. In terms of decision variable in the energy system, you will have all of basically the energy flows between different technology across different sectors of the given system that is modeled, but you will have also technology capacity, technology annual activities, and so on and so on. So these decision variable will be endogenous to the model, so will be provided by the model following a certain criteria. You have different example here, so it can be in the case of the models that we've seen today will be cost minimization, but it can also be other things. You may want to minimize like energy losses, emissions, operational risk, and so on. And you may want also to maximize something. We will have a nice example here on how you may want to maximize production, for example, or profit, return on investment, load matching, and so on. And you can also have a different model that will combine different objective function and not necessarily have only one. And finally, in terms of constraint, the third component of an optimization program, you will have the constraints that are typical to any energy system model, like wherever you apply it, it's always valid. So basic physical constraint, but you will also have constraints that are, and this is the larger majority of the constraints that are applied to the project scope or the region you want to model. For example, energy service demand to meet, or resource availability, and so on. And finally, the third type that also we hear a lot is the policy constraint, like a greenhouse gas target to meet, for instance. Optimization can also be applied at very different scopes. So you can build an optimization problem to optimize at a single technology level, like a hydro dam turbine, up to the full economy-wide energy system. And similarly, in terms of time resolution, if you have, for example, a model built on annual data, you can solve for single or multiple time resolution, hourly data to solve for the sub-annual level. And finally, if you benefit from real-time data, you will also be able to optimize at the minute level. So there's different types of optimization for different types of problem. So in terms of AI, there's, of course, different types of AI technique. I will not go into that. These are just the most common one that we hear a lot. We will have very interesting example in this panel about this. And so we hear more and more about it, like AI models can be used to improve optimization models, but optimization models can also be informed by AI models. So if we look at the modeling processes from the beginning to the end, beginning being data collection, preparation, and so on. So you can use AI for this. That's the part that I'm the most skeptical about. When people tell me you should do AI to do your data collection for your model, I'm sorry, I'm not convinced yet. There's too much judgment and human judgment expert that is needed before you input a data in your model. But in some other area, I think it can be very useful, and this is what we have started to do at ESMIA, for example, is to integrate AI on the demand side, where optimization, there's more uncertainty, and it's more difficult to project demand, especially in those sectors where there's a strong behavior component, for instance. And finally, you can also have AI technique applied to the scenario design phase, and result analysis. We'll also have an example on this panel. And to conclude, where we got this idea to start integrating AI in our optimization modeling is that every year we need to calibrate our model, for example, for the oil export. And every year we have to redo this again and again. And we have a hard time to follow all of these changes in terms of like oil projection that different organization will provide, like in terms of global demand. And AI can be used very much to better understand the correlation between these projections or forecast or prediction, whatever, between events and so on. So that's one of the area, and even worse than, can I go back? Even worse than the crude oil demand, these are the WTI prices forecasted by CER since 2019. They were all converted in the same currency of the same year. And this is a very nice spaghetti graph that I called. So when you see that, and year after year, you have to recalibrate your model, trying to figure out why there was so much change from last year and why it's caused to that. So we thought that we will start to integrate AI to better understand this and probably to do our own projection in the future, and to be able to refresh these projections also more often than just at the single year basis. So this is just one example, one idea, but you will see that there's many other ideas that I will show you. So to conclude, I want to introduce our first speaker. So it's Sarah Séguin. She's an engineer and professor at the Department of Computer Sciences and Mathematics at the University of Quebec in Chicoutimi. She's also a member of GERAD, which is the group for research and decision analysis based in Montreal. She's the head of the Laboratory for Research in Modeling, Graph, and Optimization. She worked primarily in multiple optimization applied in the energy sector and more especially in the hydropower sector. So welcome, Sarah, please.
Yeah. This one. Yeah. It's not changing. Okay, perfect. Just making sure. Okay, so hello everyone. So today my talk is very different from what you have been seeing since this morning. So I'm really going to talk about hydropower operation. So how do we optimize the actual decision from a producer's perspective? So why am I talking about a producer's perspective? Well, for the past 10 years, I've been working specifically with Rio Tinto in the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region, where they own and operate aluminum smelters and also own and operate their own hydropower system. So they have to determine how to make the best decisions out of their system. So at the end of this talk, you will see that even though I'm talking only about hydropower optimization, there are still a lot of challenges when it comes to mathematical optimization. So yeah, we'll talk. So hydropower optimization. So I'm glad that you introduced the different levels and timescales. So I will talk about the different levels that are usually used in hydropower optimization. I want to talk specifically about the short-term problem because this is what I've been working on. And then talk about the small attempts we did with prediction and integrating AI. So what is hydropower optimization? So as it was just explained, so when we're doing optimization, we want to take the best decision possible. When we're doing hydropower optimization, we want to value the water in the reservoir and make the most energy out of what is available. So as I mentioned, here on the right, you can see the Lac Saint-Jean hydropower system. So they own and operate 6 hydropower plants. In each of these plants, they have many turbines. And so we have to determine what is the actual schedule for production in order to make the most out of the water. And in this case, we're in the province of Quebec, so we're actually in a regulated market. So there's no bidding or market involved. As a producer, we simply want to produce the most we can. I also work in deregulated market settings, for example, with Sintef Energy Research in Norway and companies such as Anio, where they actually have to bid every day on the amount they can buy and sell, and then there's a clearing every day, and the operator tells everyone what to do. So these models are complex. So there are many hydropower plants, many turbines, many time horizons. So usually we use many levels of optimization in order to be able to make a good decision. So in practice, we use mostly medium and short-term models. So the long-term will be if there's major changes to the system. For example, if we're taking out a turbine for 5 years, what's the impact? But on an operational level, we're trying to really develop mathematical models that will be make the scheduling on a weekly and a daily horizon. So the medium-term models are used usually to determine what are the reservoir volumes weekly with a foresight of a year, maybe. And when we're talking about short-term, so these are the types of model I work with, we usually try to take a decision every hour or every day, depending on the system, for a few days to up to a week. So what is short-term scheduling in particular? So here we're really talking about micro level. So the models we've seen this morning is countrywide or province-wide. I'm looking at simply my small hydropower system. How can we optimize that the best we can? So with the short-term model, what we're trying to determine is what are the actual reservoir volumes, what is the water processed by each turbine, what is the water spilled at the dam, and what are the actual turbines in operation. So just previously, she introduced decision variables. So these are decision variables for our short-term model. We have to find volumes, water processed, and the actual turbines in operation. And that is for every power plant and for each time step in the horizon. So these models are quite complex because there are many variables when we're talking about many time steps. So before we do any optimization, so I'm not going into physics or presenting any equations, but if we want to be able to maximize the energy production, we have to understand how is the actual energy produced at a power plant to be able to have an analytical representation of this function in order to put it as an objective function in our optimization problem. So when we're talking about the energy production, I'm not going into details, but basically we have to consider the reservoir upstream level, downstream. We have to consider the unit water discharge, the total water discharge. Each turbine has a different efficiency also. So for the same values of water discharge and volume, each turbine will produce a different amount. So we have to consider many things when we're actually modeling the production at a single power plant. So turbines, we also have to consider energy prices. So as I just mentioned, in my case with Rio Tinto, I have the luxury to not have to consider prices because we're working on our own hydropower system. But as a mathematical modeler, that allows us to be very precise in the actual energy production function. When we're talking about a deregulated market, when there's actual bidding on the markets, then we have to add these prices into the models. Other considerations, for example, demand. So once again, with Rio Tinto, I'm lucky because the demand is fixed. We're talking about aluminum smelters. So demand is known in advance and you can't just start and stop a smelter. So I do not have to consider that also, which makes our modeling very precise. But in real cases, or if we're talking about other deregulated markets, then demand will be unknown. And we also have to consider uncertainty regarding demand. And we finally have to consider inflows, which are stochastic. So we have water that becomes available from precipitations of rain or snowmelt, and we also have to consider that in our model. So we have access to a lot of historical data for scenarios, for prices, if we're in the deregulated market, inflows, and we have, in this specific project, for example, we have 3,000 possible scenarios for inflows. If we're talking about an optimization model, this will take a lot of computational effort, and we also want our models to be quick. So we usually use scenario reduction techniques to only optimize a few scenarios using scenario trees, but still representing the distribution of the data. So we have a lot of data, but it's still it's a lot of data to process from the optimization point of view also. And when we're talking specifically on hydropower scheduling, so depending on the problem again, if we're in a producer point of view, in a regulated system, then we will want to maximize the energy production. In a deregulated market, maybe we'll want to maximize profit and so on. And there are many constraints to consider. Minimally, the physics of the hydropower system. So everything that is processed upstream has to be available downstreams. We can have minimum flow for fish, for example, for environmental constraints, for leisure in the summer with boats, maximum volumes for erosion, for risk of flooding, delivering required demand, and so forth. So short-term scheduling can become very complex very quickly because these problems are large and are very nonlinear and non-convex. So why do we do all this short-term scheduling? Well, just to recall, we want to know how to operate our specific hydropower system from our producer point of view. So we want to know which turbines are on, which are off, what are the water discharges, and the volumes of reservoir. And this morning, we were talking about benchmarking. So again, if we're developing a new formulation, we want to see if it's accurate or if it could be used in practice. So usually what we do is that we compare with real decisions that occurred in the past given certain scenarios to see if we're similar or not quite off of what they have been doing for years. We don't want to just change that either. So these dams have been there for a long time, and we still want to represent accurately. So very quickly, crash course on hydropower optimization. Why do we do it? And so mathematical optimization has been widely used and accepted from producers to do the scheduling of their power plants. But I figured, well, can we try to predict this? So why? Well, if you Google AI on the past 5 years, so you will see the trend of the keyword AI in a Google search. So in the five past years, there has been a big increase. So as an academic also, we have the leisure to work about on anything we want. So we said, well, why not try AI in hydropower optimization? So there's not a lot of literature on this. But what was the real motivation behind this? So hydropower producers have large amounts of data. For example, Rio Tinto have around 60 years of data every 2 minutes. So this is something we could try to use. So my question as an academic, I don't want to just say we're not using optimization. It is my key field of research, but I was still interested, could we use AI to solve the actual short-term hydropower model? So what we did, and this is a first attempt, so we said, let's try to describe the problem in terms of machine learning. So we used the LSTM, not going into details, but what we're trying to do is predict the water discharge, so that's going to be processed at the plant for the 96 next hours. And of course, to benchmark, we said, okay, we will compare with an optimization model that we know that is viable, just to look at, is the prediction doing something good or not? So very preliminary results. What you can see here is what I want to show you is that, okay, the dark blue is the actual reality. You have volume, water discharge, and number of turbines that are working. And then you have the solution from the optimization in red, and in green is the prediction. So when you look at this at a first glance, quickly you say, well, yeah, it seems to be working. I mean, the prediction is not totally off, and it's quite similar to what the optimization model is doing and what reality has done also. But it also brought a lot of questions. For example, how do we treat all the turbine states? How do we enforce the final volumes in the optimization models? So yes, it seems that we can be doing something with this, but it has raised a lot more questions than in the beginning of the project. So in hydropower optimization specifically, mathematical optimization has been used for decades, widely used and accepted. And I think that with all the data that they collect, we could improve the models using AI, as she mentioned in her presentation. So maybe for picking scenarios or for the prices or something like that. So my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Zara. Next speaker, so please welcome Antoine Lesage-Landry. Antoine is Associate Professor of Electrical Engineering at Polytechnique Montreal. He's also a member of GERAD and of MILA. MILA is an AI institute in Quebec. He did a postdoc in Energy Resource Group at the University of California before that. His research also focused on mathematical analysis of decision-making problems in the energy sector and also in machine learning and power engineering. So please welcome Antoine.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. So I'm very happy to be here today to talk about our recent work in my research group. So I want to discuss some of the questions we've been asking ourselves and some of the proposed solution or tentative preliminary bit of solution we have. And so the starting point is machine learning, neural networks, and energy modeling. So machine learning and specifically a neural network have been designed as very good, if not exceptional, nonlinear predictors. But I believe there's still a question that needs to be answered. Are they the right tool for energy modeling? And are they compatible with high stakes or safety critical sector like energy system? So in other words, what I mean is, can we trust a neural network for application we consider as a community that is for energy modeling? So let's look attentively into neural network. So on the one hand, what we have is a very opaque process. We take input in, and then the black box spits out our outputs, but these outputs are great. Okay, but as there's a question to be asked here, there's a low interpretability. Then the process to train them is also pretty complex. There's a lot of parameters, there's a lot of moving part into this. Also, they're susceptible to data corruption or to adversarial attack that can hinder their prediction. And finally, they have limited, if any, out-of-sample performance guarantees. To combine all together, this results in the fact that there need to be careful consideration when to ensure that these models are reliable when they are exploited, but also that means there's a low acceptability for deployment in critical aspect of energy system, and I'm here talking, for example, in power system operations. So that said, there have been sustained effort to improve over these limitations. We can think of black box optimization for hyperparameter tuning, so to improve the training process. We can discuss post-training verification that gives us a bound on the output of that neural network. A tight MLOps procedure will also help to capture something like data drift. So for example, here seasonality would be one. And also embedding physical knowledge within the model will help us better understand what's going on, and we leave a bit the black box behind us. But there's no free lunch. That all comes at a cost, and this yield a higher training complexity and a restricted scaling. So what I want to discuss now is what we've been looking into in my research group. With that in mind, can we design neural network approaches that are reliable and then can provide good prediction, trustworthy prediction for energy system? To do so, what we need, something that you can actually see as my wish list, is an efficient training procedure, a robustness to data corruption, out-of-the-box performance guarantees, and a bit of interpretability. So our approach, that'll be the only time I mention it, but we'll design the Wasserstein distributionally robust shallow convex neural network, Wadiro SCNN, also known as our approach. Okay, so here's a motivating example. So we've been working over the past 2 years with Hilo, Hydro-Quebec's demand response aggregator, and the question we're trying to answer is, can we have good load prediction for non-residential building? So here I'm including a lot of building, can be office building, hospital, institutional building, the last one being my institution. And what we want to do is capture the energy consumption, be able to predict such energy consumption. So what we'll need is a nonlinear prediction. Consumption patterns are complicated and are dependent on many factors. We want an approach that is computationally light, given the large amount of buildings we'll have in our grid, and I want one model per one model per building, so that I have a nice resolution. And lastly, given the sensibility of our application, I want my model to be trustworthy. So yeah, and why am I doing that, you may ask? So I want to assess the baseload of my building so that I can better characterize the baseload of my system, so I can then in turn assess the local stress on power system infrastructure. We can think of transformer or lines, but also I want to characterize demand response program and also see the impacts of such demand response program. So let's get into the details now. Okay, so I'll consider the simplest of all of neural networks. So usually we see those neural networks with stacks of layers and layers, but no. We'll have just a single hidden layer. That's the green layer one, the green layer over there. My output will be a one-dimension thing, very limited, but that's all right. I want to predict energy consumption. That's kilowatt hour. That's a scalar. I'm fine by it. But that's definitively the simplest neural network you'll ever see. But that's also the only one I'm able to analyze because I want to get some characterization of it. I want to know what's going on. So that's the trade-off I want to do. So my training problem is as follows. I have this architecture. I want to minimize some training loss. I have a data set, and my weights are kind of the knobs I can tune here and there to get the best prediction. So here my data would be building and weather information, and I want to predict energy consumption. Perfect. Now let's get into it. Oh, my slides suffered through the transformation. Okay. Yeah. Anyway. Okay, so what I want to do now is have a robust approach. I want to be able to sustain any attack from uncertainty. Indeed, data will be plagued with uncertainty. So data here is identified in red. So this uncertainty can be seen as some kind of robustness. So I can define an ambiguity set, that's kind of a world where all my version of my data set lives. I had this outcome of uncertainty there, this outcome of uncertainty there, and so on and so forth. And what I want to do actually is take the worst, very bad data set and be able to make potentially good prediction with that bad data set. So that what does that boil down to? I have my worst case U certainty, and then I want that gives us the worst case, and within the worst case, I want to still take the best one. That's my min max problem over here. Perfect. So what is this ambiguity set I've been mentioning? So I have my world of data. Let's picture it as a ball over here. And now this is what I measured. Perfect. If I make other measurements, I might get this guy, and so on and so forth. And I want to be able to create some kind of ball that can encapsulate not only other data sets, actual, unnoisy, the ground truth of the data set, so I can be robust against these folks. Oh, my slide really suffered through that transformation. So what I'll do is I'll use some kind of distance that say, yes, Antoine's data, capture everything that is around, and make sure you're robust against all of those data. So in the 3D space, if I want to know the distance between Sarah and I'll just trace a line and I'll measure it, and that's my Euclidean norm. Now in this realm of data, what I'll do is use some other folks' distance, call it Wasserstein, and you just explained the title of my approach, and that is my distance. So I can make sure to capture all the data set that I did not measure, but that could have happened, and that makes my approach robust. So after some heavy lifting, there's a lot of proof hidden between slide 11 and 12. I get this nice form that tells me that I have my training problem and then some generalized regularization, and that enables me to capture all the robustness I needed. Perfect. For optimization folks, that's a convex optimization problem, so I can take it, send it to a convex optimization solver, and I get directly the solution, the optimal solution, and I'm perfect. That's my best set of weights, and that gives me my neural network architecture. That is in comparison pretty different to normal machine learning approach, where they'll use some heuristic to train their approach, sometimes artisanal, to get an output that will make still good prediction, but with limited interpretability. So if I go back to my wish list, what did I do now? Okay, my ticks are off, but I tick the box for efficient training procedure, and I also tick the box for robustness to data corruption. So let's continue our adventure, and let's move to the next item. Now, I want to study out-of-sample performance. So with that architecture and all the work we did together just now, for a new data point, the expected prediction error for a given probability will be bounded by the following term that brings back our training loss, a probability term, and some other dimension term. What does that mean? It establishes a prediction error on unseen data. So let's picture that as a safety net, and perfect. That won't be too dangerous. So keeping track on our progress, what we just tick now is out of the box performance guarantee. Perfect. Now on, let's tackle on interpretability. So given that we have this nice optimization problem, what we can do is integrate knowledge of the system directly within the problem, and that's what I did in Magenta over there. So I can add any convex physical constraint I want. Can be a box constraint, can be ramping constraint, can be dynamic constraint, and I'll have an example on that in 2 slides, I believe. And I can all embed that and redo the training. And the difference is I'll ensure that the constraints are respected during training, as opposed to being promoted like in normal physics-informed neural network. And so going back to the wish list, we almost did it. So I'll only allow myself for a partial point for that problem. It's partially addressed because I included more interpretability, but that's still a black box with a bit of physics behind it. So that's not perfect. To be continued. So let's go back to my motivating example. I want to predict the load of some non-residential building. So what I'll do, because I have a very efficient model, I'll use a rolling prediction. I'll take 12 weeks of data, train the model on it, and then make a 1-week prediction, move the window, and redo the thing, so on and so forth, until I cover every data that I want. For our approach, I'll inject some physics. The simplest of all, I'll just want to promote a model that has the energy consumption of a building above 0. While that sounds simple, it's not a given with a machine learning algorithm, and you'll see it, many of them will output, and myself as well, output negative energy consumption, and there's no energy production over here. And I'll compare it to some of the state-of-the-art model for machine learning in buildings. And on the right side, I put some example of the feature we use. So what does it look like? So a very, very heavy slide. So I'm comparing our approach on the top, our approach with physics, with all the other approach I mentioned, and the darker, the better. So except for this building and that is on this claim, we're doing pretty good, which is very good. And at the bottom, we look at the constraint violation that I mentioned. If I embed the physics constraint, what we see if I don't get a perfect score, but let's look at the other ones. So our approach is not that bad, but if we go to a GP, a Gaussian process, which is a very good model for building, we get a 68% increase. And if we go to SVR, it's about 200% increase. So there's a lot of rounds that are below 0. Let's look at a week worth, a few days. A few days of prediction. What we see here, it's pretty hard to decipher, but gray is the actual ground truth, the reality, and pink is our model, and all the others are our competitors. And we see that if we look at some of the figure, this line being the 0, we get some model that makes predictions that are way below 0. And by embedding some physics, we're able to slow down this process and get a better sense, and so develop a bit of trust in our model. So today, what we did in a very fast way, we discuss important reliability aspect of neural network-based model that needs to be addressed before deployment in energy system. So in this work, I propose a new neural network model that meets some requirement, some trustworthiness requirement for usage in energy system. And here I'm finishing up with my wish list that I partially tick. Efficient training procedure, so that we can do it, so on and so forth. Robustness to data corruption, out-of-the-box performance guarantees, and partial interpretability. So just to conclude, I'll take 16 seconds just to mention that my research group this summer will be organizing a summer school on numerical methods for electric power systems. So we'll be discussing in depth learning and optimization method for renewable power system. If that sounds interesting to you, please reach out to me either today, tomorrow, or via email. Thank you very much for your attention.
And believe me, Antoine simplified his presentation since we talked first. So next speaker is Bidad Essani. So Bidad is a consultant in decision mathematics at Artelis Canada. He's also the developer of Electricity Quebec, which is a real-time data platform that provide insight on the Quebec electricity grid. He's a researcher in applied energy and sustainability with an expertise in programming, machine learning, and energy analytics. So welcome, Bidad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh. Hello. Good afternoon. My name is Bedad. I'm decision mathematics consultant at the Artelis Canada, researcher at chaire de gestion du secteur de l'énergie, HEC Montréal, and creator of Electricité Québec, a real-time data platform of Electricité of Quebec grid. And today I will discuss how AI and ML techniques are being applied to enhance short-term electricity price forecasting, critical task in the modern electricity markets, especially in North America. In this slide, I want to discuss the horizon of electricity price forecasting. First, I want to start with short-term electricity price forecasting. I will use the acronym EPF to save my time. The short-term EPF, it ranges from a minute to a week, and the granularity of the forecast, maybe 5 minute, 15 minute, or hourly, it depends on the market. And it supports real-time operations and market bidding strategies. Moving to medium-term EPF, it's useful for medium electricity contracts like forward and future contracts. And it ranges from a week to a year, and the granularity of the forecast might be daily or weekly or hourly. And the last type of EPF is long-term EPF, and it ranges from a year to a decade. And it's useful for decision makers, infrastructure investment, PPA, or regulatory planning. And the granularity of the forecast might be yearly, seasonal, monthly, and hourly. During my presentation, I want to focus on the first side, the short-term EPF. Okay, in this slide, I want to explain the application of short-term EPF in the electricity markets. First, the first application is for supply and demand. It's for physical traders in the electricity markets. They can use short-term EPF to optimize bidding and offering strategies. The second application is for virtual traders, non-physical traders, to enhance day-ahead real-time trading strategies, especially in North America. North American electricity markets. And the third application is for ancillary services, because they can evaluate the opportunity cost associated with providing ancillary services. And the last application of short-term electricity price forecasting is for batteries, battery storage, because they can optimize their charging and discharging strategies to maximize their profit. The main objective function of my presentation is to maximize the profit. Is a bit different from other presentations. The first step of the modeling is to find the impactful features of electricity price forecasting. In the short-term EPF, the impactful features might be time-dependent features like seasonality, hour of a day, lagged prices. And the Second group of features can be event-driven features like extreme weather conditions, outages like extreme cold weather that I saw last year in Alberta. The third part of the impactful features might be demand side data like demand forecast, historical demand, peak demand indicator. All of them can provide insights to the market dynamics. The generation side data like renewable forecast, historical generation data, reservoir level, all of them can be impactful, but it depends on the market structure. And the last type of features can be market-related features like congestion forecasts, especially for US markets. After finding the impactful features, it's time to select the model. Okay, I want to start from statistical models. Statistical models is one of the popular models used in the energy industry because it's interpretable and explainable, and it requires less computational time. Models like ARIMA, SARIMA, linear regression, but these models have some demerits like limited in capturing nonlinearity, especially for price data, because price data doesn't have a clear pattern and it struggles with high variability in price data. After that, the machine learning model emerged. Models like Brandon Forest, XGBoost, SVM, and those type of model can capture complex patterns and handles large data set compared to statistical models. But the demerit is it needs higher time compared to a statistical one. After that, deep learning models emerged like LSTM, CNN, and recently transformers. And these models can better capture temporal and spatial dependency in price data or total input data set. But the demerits of these models can be the high computational cost. It's not computationally efficient. It needs a large data set to train the model. But the choice of the model depends on the use case, as I mentioned before, the application, the computational resources, and desired accuracy, or probably your manager. And yeah, in this slide, I wanna showcase an example of short-term electricity price forecasting in IESO, Ontario Electricity Market. The paper named Price Forecasting in the Ontario Electricity Market via 3Conv GRU hybrid model, written by Professor Pierre-Olivier Pinot and Laurent Charlin and me, and is published recently. And in this paper, we proposed a new architecture of deep learning. In this architecture, we use the 3 streams of CNN GRU layers, and by hybridizing CNN and GRU in both serial and parallel way, we could capture the spatial and temporal dependencies in price data effectively. And the key advantage of this model is the downsampling technique that we use in the second and third streams of this proposed architecture. Because with downsampling technique, we reduce the noise associated with the short-term fluctuation in the price. And in the next slide, I wanna show you the result of the proposed model. Here is the table. There's a comparison of the proposed model and a statistical machine learning and some basics deep learning models. And the table shows that our model or proposed model works well. Also, there are some example of it's a step ahead forecasting. It's not a week forecasting. It's like one step ahead forecasting in 3 different weeks in an ISO market. The black is ISO forecast. The blue is real price, and our model is is bolded in red. In this slide, this slide is just for wrapping up my presentation. To wrap up my presentation, I add some future trend in short-term electricity price forecasting. The first advancement in this field can be probabilistic forecasts or point forecasts, which approach adds greater value to decision-making in the electricity markets. Because probabilistic forecast can provide more flexibility to traders for decision-making. The second advancement is the spatial dependencies between nodes, especially for US markets, because as you know, in the US markets, we have lots of nodes, zones, hubs, and there is a correlation between those nodes, and we can capture the dependency between nodes with graph-based models. And the third advancement can be generative AI in forecasting. The first thing is using LLM. By using LLM, we can extract some features from contextual data. Here is a table from ISO ETS website, and we can extract some data from the event log table, for example. It's just an example. Also, the time GPT, probably the next ChatGPT for time series forecasting. And this model recently developed by Nick Stella Group, and the paper is published called Time GPT-1. And they claim that we can generate reliable forecasts without explicit modelings. And yeah, that's it. And thank you.
Thank you, Widad. Now our last speaker is Mackenzie Judson. So Mackenzie completed a bachelor in mechanical engineering at Queen's University. She's now a research assistant at CICIT, and she did her master in civil engineering at UVic. She explore, like she consider uncertainty in energy system models to try to provide better insight out of the models. So welcome, Mackenzie.
Okay. Thank you for your patience, everybody. Okay, so I want to start off with what I see the strengths and weaknesses are with energy optimization models, the way that they're conventionally used. So to me, the biggest strengths are the structural validity. If we can agree on how we've constructed the models and we can agree on the data that we use to run them, which we often don't, as we've seen today, but then at least we can agree on the findings. And that, to me, is their ultimate strength, that they aid in narrative development and they aid in the development of these visions and guiding principles that we've discussed so much today. And they help us tell a story that can extend beyond the technical community and motivate real action. This also is kind of one of their biggest weaknesses. To me, the biggest weakness is the reliance on assumptions, both the assumptions that we make about how something's going to act 40 years from now, and also the assumptions that we make about what may or may not be important as modelers. So they reflect our assumptions, our knowledge base, and our preferences. Another weakness is, I'm going to call it over-quantification. We know that we don't have a crystal ball into the future, and we know that they're best suited to helping us tell these stories about the future. So when we are providing numerical values and comparing them against each other, and some of these models, particularly I've worked a lot with copper, produces thousands of results, the actual story might get lost. And also these models are expensive per optimization. We all know this. So that has led to models having a limited ability to account for uncertainties in findings and to do widespread uncertainty studies. So I'm interested in using data-driven approaches, including machine learning approaches, to address a lot of these weaknesses while still hanging on to those strengths. So I did a review of data-driven approaches of energy system optimization results, focusing on long-term models. We identified 37 unique methods, including AI. So now I consider my current work not to be mastery of any particular tool, but bridging the gap between the tool and the job, while also keeping those advantages in narrative development in mind. So to illustrate this, today I'm going to present to you 2 case studies on machine learning tools providing unique insights into the copper electricity capacity expansion model that we talked about in the previous session. I want to pay attention to the specific type of question that we ask when we use these methods and what the solution form looks like. Okay, so in case study 1, we wanted to develop some narrative about likely electricity system development pathways under technology and some economic uncertainty sources. So as I mentioned, the benefit of optimization model for developing narratives is that one pathway leads itself to one internally consistent story. However, the challenge is accounting for a massive range of especially technology uncertainty in one story. So to do so, I used a clustering approach. I generated a large set of copper results for 2050, and I used clustering, which is an unsupervised learning approach. But essentially the way clustering works is it identifies similar patterns in data. So you can kind of see these nice colored clusters in a compressed representation of 2050 copper results. And then taking the pathway that's closest to the center of those groups, then we can analyze those pathways in IDEA like we might for a standard copper result. In this way, we discover our scenarios rather than applying them up front. So the result here was, this is a sample visualization of the 3 representative pathways that we discovered in this particular exercise. I used a linear representation to just try to make it look nice on the slide, but each of these profiles represents a unique build out in copper. So we identified 2 pathways that are very similar. There's a high and a low demand case, but they both lean heavily on renewables and using electricity generated using blue hydrogen to balance it out. And they also have increased RNG usage. But the interesting finding here is that we identify this unique pathway that ends up with a set of pathways that's like have very unique buildouts. And the thing that make these buildouts unique is the presence of green hydrogen instead of blue hydrogen. These pathways result from low green hydrogen price assumptions, and they end up not using RNG, and they do have increased backup, and they have relatively similar amounts of all of the other pieces of capacity, especially renewables. So the takeaway here is that we have 3 dominant visions of system options and some ideas of the levers that we can push today under uncertainty to nudge in a desired direction. So the second case study, we wanted to look at prioritizing effective action. So the benefit of optimization models is that, of course, we can look at 2 pathways, compare them, see what assumptions went into them. But the challenge is that we know that scenarios often contain many, many results, often not changing just one thing. So it's expensive to evaluate individual factors, especially in such a complex system. You want to look at so many different options. So in this case, we used a surrogate modeling approach. I'll spare you the technical details, but it used a neural network as well. A surrogate model is an AI version of the full fidelity model, in this case copper, that takes in the inputs of interest and replicates the results that copper would produce, but far, far faster. As in, copper takes 8 hours to run for me quite often, and the surrogate produces results in milliseconds. So this enabled individual policy evaluation for us. So this is another sample finding where 10,000 copper results were emulated in seconds. And this allowed us to identify, rank, and show the relative impact of the top 5 factors on key outcomes that we might be interested in. I arbitrarily chose natural gas generation capacity build-out in 2030, but you could repeat this for any outcome. So for this outcome, we see that the higher carbon tax decreases gas build-out, and it has 2 times more of a strong impact than any other input factors considered. So the purpose of this is that it can help us prioritize effective action and then also look at synergistic action in future work. So in summary, based on my review, the case studies, and the work that we have underway, AI for decision support offers substantial advantages in pattern recognition in complex systems, as opposed to parsing thousands of results manually or relying on manual comparison. Further, it can enable uncertainty and sensitivity analyses, which can provide together fundamentally new types of analysis, which is really exciting. The trade-off, however, is that developing that base data set is still costly, even if once, say, the surrogate is created, incremental evaluations are negligible. Further, there is that loss of tractability. So these methods are not a replacement for the underlying models, as you might find inconsistencies. So my takeaway is, I want to challenge the assumption that uncertainty is somewhat intangible and hard for us to develop stories around. I think that consideration of uncertainty, if you go about it in a certain way, can actually be an asset for more robust and more valuable stories. For decision makers, if political ability is a finite resource, we need to tell stories about the most impactful factors to help us prioritize effective action and hedge against downsides. Lastly, there's a huge untapped opportunity for data scientists in this field. Rather than a lack of problems or a lack of solutions, in our review, we found that the lack of these applications being widespread yet mainly stems from a communication barrier. So again, I consider my best role in this work as finding the best tool for the job and fostering these strong interdisciplinary communication bridges. I would love to talk more. I'll be here tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mackenzie. So now time for questions. I have some here. I can go with that. So the question that we get the most, and I think it's relevant for all of the panelists. So in your view, what emerging trends in AI and optimization that is likely to change significantly the energy modeling field in the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh, that's up to me. Okay, let me think a bit. So I think one of the things, and I was a bit surprised that we did not discuss it more this morning, is uncertainty. The optimization tools are there or are becoming there. They're more scalable, so uncertainty can be better accounted for. I'm not only thinking of scenario-based stochastic optimization, but also robust optimization and something like distributionally robust optimization. So injecting more of the data we have to better capture the uncertainty. And given also, and combining this with large-scale optimization, tools are getting better and better, and that might have a significant impact on decision-making, but also prediction and decisions. That'd be my take.
Yes. Yeah, so if I can add to that, I talked about it very quickly on my last slide, but I think really combining AI with optimization, if I'm talking in my field, hydropower optimization, for instance, then we have a lot of data, as I mentioned, then we can't just use this raw data and predict something with it, but maybe we can use this data to better calculate some parameters, for example, in the optimization models. I'm very interested in your time GPT forecasting tool also. So some algorithms that can be used for forecasting, yeah, of course, for prices, inflows, I think are very interesting.
Yeah, for the price forecasting problem, I prepared a slide for the future trend. But yeah, the optimization models can be hybridized with machine learning models in terms of result, not in terms of methodology. For example, the average of the result, average of both, or the uncertainty, as Antoine mentioned. Yeah, especially in the probabilistic forecast, I think is the next trend of price forecasting problem because it gives the traders, both virtuals and physical traders, more flexibility to decide to send an offer or beat.
I feel like this might be kind of dodging the question, but I feel like just based on my work, it's very problem specific. And as an engineer and a scientist, you have to think about what types of trade-offs you're willing to make. So in terms of, yeah, that loss of tractability, that loss of accuracy where you may not know where it manifests. If you're running a certain problem and you have a different set of values around that or a different set of goals, then AI may work for your colleague and not for you, purely depending on whether you need that tractability to appropriately answer your problem.
Yeah, and actually, let's talk about data. So this is also a question we have and that I have a personal interest in. Like somebody is asking, is it true that AI require a lot of data, a large data set? Probably yes. We know yes, but so when it comes a limitation actually for your problems?
Yeah, I think machine learning at large is very data hungry, and I think it's twice as much as what you're thinking right now. One other question we can discuss is the energy consumption that this thing has. I'll leave that to other people. But yeah, so it's a lot of data, but also it's a lot of good data. I guess you're only as good as your data. So if you have very noisy or like telemetry issues, measurement issue, cheap measurement instrument, and all that is cheap data that you have. So that not only size, but the quality of the data will be limited. And so there's a pre-processing, there's, as I mentioned, MLOps that needs to be implemented. So that's the size of the data set, but also the quality of it.
Yes, I agree. The quality of data is important, especially as we found through our dashboard. Quebec is publishing sometimes wrong data, some spikes in the demand, and all of the spikes are wrong because it's significant spikes in demand, and it doesn't make sense. And in the real-time operation, especially in real-time forecasting, I'm not talking about the papers and academic things, because real-time forecasting, it's very challenging, and the quality of data can affect the result, can ruin the forecast. Yeah.
If I go back to my question that was, can we use prediction to predict the decisions in the short-term model? And I said that we have around maybe 60 years of data every 2 minutes, but all this data depends on the actual state of the reservoir at that moment, and also depends on the future state of this reservoir, given if inflows are to be happening or not. So if you rule all that out and you try to categorize with certain volume, quantities of volume, and then given future inflow, in the end, you don't have that much data to actually train your model on if you're trying to use machine learning. So we have a lot of data, but can you use it all? No, and it's very dependent on the states of the, in my case, of the system itself.
If I can just comment on that, and that's very interesting because there's like the old machine learning dilemma that is exploration versus exploitation. If you only had that data for that specific state, yeah, you'll be good. But then do you really want to explore in a critical system again? Are you able to pay the price of exploring, getting new data? I think that's another question that is very interesting, or that has to be carefully investigated.
That's something that I ran across in my research in both of the case studies. Both of the case studies that I showed were developed not in collaboration with stakeholders, and both of them had high upfront computational cost to generate the data sets that we then analyzed. So it would be very easy for anybody to walk up to the mic and say, I disagree with your forecast for hydrogen price, which is very controversial. And if I wanted to rerun my analysis, because it's out of my sample, I would have to go back to the base model, run it hundreds or thousands more times, and then redo my analysis. So it becomes, that's why I'm emphasizing the tool for the job, because you want to have an idea of how you plan on answering the question, the form of the results that you're going to be generating, before you spend all of that resource generating your model or your giant data set to then analyze.
You, Serge or Normand, who was there first? Serge, okay.
I think Normand was here first,
Serge.
but he's more polite. Question is for Sarah especially, but for everyone at the same. Serge Bédard, Natural Resources Canada. Given the the future of more variable renewables and more unpredictable or more difficult to predict in some cases, how do you see the role of your damp and hydro and the model that you're developing in playing a reservoir or a battery type of storage? And how would you see the need for AI and more advanced modeling work to be able to do that? And maybe even before that question, how physically is that possible to fluctuate or make variation of these turbines in a relatively fast time frame or short time frame? So several questions embedded in one.
Yeah, so I'll try to remember. So if I go back to like the fluctuation, so when we're talking about hydropower operations, there's maybe a 5-minute ramp up compared to if we're talking about thermal generation. So we can actually solve the problem for 15 minutes at a time and not change the turbines in that period. So no ramp up, so we don't have to consider it. But also in practice, when we're actually developing the models, the operators that have been using these, well, not using, operating the hydropower plants for decades, they don't want to change the turbines every 15 minutes either. So yeah, mathematically, we can have the best optimal solution every 5 minutes. But in practice, don't change your turbine more than once an hour, because then you'll annoy the people that are actually operating these plants and that have been doing so for long and know the plant and how it performs as well. So...
But if the value, if you're sufficiently rewarded, will that be a possibility for Rio Tinto, Alcan, and others to start playing a role of?
So I think that's why I'm starting to explore prediction and all that, because things have been always done the same way forever. Like 3 types of optimization levels: long, medium, short, real time. It's always operating in the same manner. But with some models, we've shown that we could actually really do something different a bit and maybe be beneficial in the long term. So I think it's twofold, the problem here. So yes, I think we have good tools, but we also have to kind of shift the mindset that is actually present in the field. And you talked about the first part was AI and wind and all that.
Well, how much of a AI would contribute, you think, to help in achieving that potential?
So for wind, here I didn't see a lot of papers with wind and hydro, but in Europe, especially in Norway, with the people I work, they have done a lot of hydropower optimization combined with the wind. So they actually put the hydro and the wind problem together in the production problem in order to use the fluctuation of the wind. And I think tools such as AI, I think for forecasting will be very interesting in the future.
Norma?
Normand Mousseau, Department of Physics, University of Montreal. I mean, first, I would say bad data is bad even when you do optimization. So I don't think it's particularly different from neural nets. But if you use artificial intelligence, and if you don't look enough at the data, of course, then you get the garbage out too. But you get garbage out anytime you get garbage in. So to me, that's nothing specific. Second, essentially, where it works well for limited data set, AI is when you have a simple output that you're measuring. When you look at these models, often you want to consider not only GHG emissions, or you want to look at many more outputs, and this rapidly gets out of hands. So would it be kind of a strategy to separate the output and optimize the different models for different questions you have? Then you don't have to maybe multiply as much the model that you put in, the amount of data you have to put in?
I think that's an interesting question. And you've seen a bit my take on it, that I'm not able to analyze a full-on neural network, so I won't do it. And then the question is, should I do just my kind of a parallel neural net and get to work with it? But definitively, there's a loss there because you're losing the correlation between the data and between your output. So you shouldn't. I'm conjuncturing that you should not expect as much of a good prediction, but maybe you'll be able to be able to bound your decision. So get an interval of that indicator, and that indicator. If that's sufficient, that could be good. But otherwise, yeah, that's a very difficult task. And I'm just saying, let's be careful.
Someone else want to add on this? No? Next question? Yes.
Yeah, Merzad Pirnia from University of Waterloo. My question is on tractability and scalability of the AI models. Like the presentation you had, Antoine, you replace an optimization model with another optimization model, which was AI-driven or neural network-driven. But you're still dealing with an optimization problem. So, and I feel like in practice, anytime we are adding those physics-informed neural networks or so, we are adding that level of complexity to the neural networks that we are losing that scalability of the models. So if you can shed some lights on this, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much for the question. So I think it goes very much in line with what I was saying. So I'm adding constraint in the design of my neural network. What I showed, what was hidden over there, was a continuous optimization problem that is convex. The physics I'm including is convex. So everything fits. I can call Cplex. I can call, what are my other friends? Mosaic, Rubian, all of those, and feed it in instead of, but I could also come up with my own gradient approach with a line search, so something very basic, and that would do the job. So that's actually my point. If we want model to be scalable, I limited my assumption. I only had my single hidden layer so that I can actually solve it. And on top of that, there's some bonus point that I got. There's the one solution. I don't have local solution of weights that if I run one time the training problem and another time, I will get different outcome. No, my problem will yield the same training loss. So I'd say this is exactly what I want. And indeed, if we just continue stacking and stacking layers and neurons, and I use ReLU, the simplest of all, because that has nice property. So I fully agreed with you, and that's why I did that from day zero. I want to plant that into my design process. So I don't know if that actually, I feel like I just commented on your question, but I fully agree.
That's great. Yeah.
I can leave I feel like I'm talking a lot, so.
But concerning the tractability, I have to agree, especially as I mentioned in my talk in hydropower. For years, it's been hydropower optimization. We have the mathematical proofs. Everyone knows it works. So if you arrive with another tool, you have to be able to explain why it works and why it works that way. And it has to be tractable. And one of the problems, well, not the problems, but in machine learning, people often put data and take the output and say, hey, I have a good solution, but they have no idea what's going on in the middle. There's so many libraries out there for programming and implementing AI. I think we have to be careful with what we're using.
Last question, perhaps. We have 3 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. So my question is more for, I think, Atoin and Baghdad. From my observation, most of the times when we talk about optimization and machine learning or AI, we're always comparing the very complex AI algorithms that are non-explainable. Meanwhile, in my opinion, we have simpler, effective ML models that are explainable. So in fact, there's a field of ML called explainable AI. So for instance, tree-based models. There are a lot of research that has shown that simple models like XGBoost or CatBoost actually outperforms very complex neural networks like LSTM, or even when you have hybrid models. And the good thing about those tree-based models like XGBoost or CatBoost, they are explainable, right? There's something like Shapley values. So my question is this, instead of looking at trying to explain a neural network, a simple neural network, why have we tried like using an XGBoost model that is already explainable and we can still get good value, good result, and it's pretty much maybe even more accurate than these complex models? Because if we can do that, then I think it already answers some of the concerns about using ML. So yeah, I think that's pretty much my question. Like, why try to use neural networks? Neural networks are great for very specific problems, but for regression tasks, there are a lot of research that's already shown that tree-based models are really good and they're explainable. So why don't we focus on those simple, explainable models? And why do we go for complex models that may not be good for our purpose?
Okay, Yeah, it's a very good question because, as I mentioned in my presentation, model selection is depends on the use case. Yeah, sometimes simple linear. I completely agree with you. Simple linear regression can beat very sophisticated transformer models in time series forecasting. And also, there is a paper published recently, and it showed that it outperforms the deep learning, sophisticated deep learning models. But it depends on your task. For example, in the field of electricity price forecasting, what's your goal? It's just producing the forecast for the next 24 hours, or no, producing the forecast for the peak hours, or producing spikes, because it's a different things. And for example, a spike forecasting is very important for traders, but not very important for big generators. It depends on and deep learning probably may better capture the spikes compared to linear one. But overall, probably the linear regression can beat maybe the deep learning one. Yeah, it depends on your use case. But yeah, it's highly probable that linear regression or sometimes XGBoost can beat deep learning.
A last comment in 10 seconds.
Yeah. So actually, this is music to my ears. This is fantastic comment. I fully agree with you. The initial title of my presentation was Building Trust in Machine Learning, very at large. And you score a lot of points at the starting line. That's perfect. And then let's just iterate on that. Will it be robust? I'm not a type of guy, so I don't have the knowledge, but my question would be still the same. That's perfect. You already score interpretability, efficiency, but is it robust? What's the out of performance guarantee? Let's just move along. You scored initial point, and let's just move along this direction. I fully agree. Why did I do that? It's because I was able to write the optimization problem, and it fit nicely into what I know. But then this is exactly the kind of question I like. If there was one key takeaway from my talk is exactly this. Are there approaches that are available to us that can do the job? Do we really need neural nets? And you inserted to it. Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you for the 4 panelists.